Hey, Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Nun Aleph in Yebmot. This is a difficult parak, but rest assured that the rest of the Masechet is not as difficult to understand.
Problem. We have had no problem.
No problem. Okay. So Rav Meir said in the Mishnah, and again we learned for a four shlema for Elazar ben Ruben, Yosef Asriel ben Chaim Michal. Rav Meir had said that ain't get get lo maimer achar. If let's say there were Reuben died leaving two wives, number one and number two, and Shimon, his brother, gave a get to one, and then he gave a get to another one. Why would he give a get? Because he thinks that's the way to dismiss the Yavama. The second one is meaningless. So he's not forbidden from marrying her family, etc. Afterwards, it doesn't mean anything. She's not forbidden to a Kohen, according to most Mepharshim. And similarly, lo maimer achar maimer. Why? The rabbi said there is get achar get. And there is maimer achar maimer. In other words, it does have an effect. What's the reason? Amar Rava, the last two words on Nun Amid Beis, top of Nun Aleph now. Amar Rava, my time of what's Rav Meir's reason? The Masafkale, he's not sure. Get idachi lo dachi. Does get remove the zika, the bond? Does it do anything or not? Maimer, he's also not sure. Maimer, ikani lo kani. These are halachas rabbanan. Minat Torah, get doesn't mean anything by Yavama, nor does Maimer. The only way, as we said, is either consummate the marriage, perform yibum, or div chalitza. So he's not sure. When the rabbis set up the idea that a get does have some effect. If you give a get, let's say there's just one yavam and one yavama, he gives her a get, well, he better follow the chalitza. He can't marry her anymore because once he's rejected her, it's rejected. So the Rabbanan said the get means something, and the maimer means something. It's the right thing to do. First, give her a ring or whatever before you consummate the marriage.
You give her a get with that. You give her a get with that having been married to her.
That's right.
It's based on the zika.
It's based on the zika, exactly. So you still need chalitza because the Torah says the only way to really dismiss is chalitza. So you still need chalitza. So the question.
If you give her a get and then chalitza,
then she's totally free. Correct. So the question over here is, why does Rav Meir say that the second get has no meaning? If the first one has meaning, the second get doesn't have any meaning, and the second maimer has no meaning. Again, if there was one yavam with two yavamas, or two yavamas and two yavams and one yavama, if the second one gave her something, a get or a maimer, after the first one did the same, it doesn't have any meaning according to Rav Meir. Why? What's his idea? What's the svara behind it? So my time Rav Meir, the Masafkale, he get dachi ilo dachi. He's not sure if it pushes away or not. Or maimer ikani ilo kani. What's the reasons? What's his idea over here? It either works or it doesn't work. Idachi, get idachi. If the get dismisses her, removes her, pushes her away, rejects her, ilo dachi. So what does that mean? Ikama dachi. If the first one works, basra my cover. What's the second one do? If the first one works to really remove the get, you still need a chalitza, but it removes the bond enough that that's all it can do. Then what does the second one do? Second one is already moving. It's like if a man gives a woman a get. Some a man is married to a woman. He gives her a get, divorces her. Then he gives her another get. What does that do? Nothing. It's meaningless. So that's what he says, same thing too. If the first get works, what does the second one do?
It doesn't work. It doesn't remove the zika from the second.
Right, it doesn't remove it because it's already removed. If the get works, so he says like this: if the get again, get idachi ilo dachi, huh?
It's only partial.
It's
the first one that works for the
okay. So we're going to say it only works partial anyway because you still need chalitza, but it does everything that it can do. If the first get has any meaning, idachi, if it removes her, that it has a meaning. In other words, it's a logical question over here. Yes, we know that the get does something that you can't marry her anymore. You can't perform yibum. But if it pushes it away, if it accomplishes something, ikama if the first one accomplishes, basra, what does the second one do? Again, afterwards it accomplished. Ikama lo dachi, if it doesn't really push away, it's very powerless. It doesn't do much. Okay, but it doesn't do anything. So basra nami lo dachi, the second one also doesn't do anything. So he says the second one has no purpose, has no effect either way. If the first one has some effect, so then that presumably is the whole effect. And what does the second one do? And the first one has no real effect. What does the second one do? That's what we're assuming right now in Gamliel. Same thing with Maimer. When Maimer acquires her, again, Maimer is the kedushin rabbanan. And you give a ring, let's say, or a star, and you so to speak, you have kedushin with her, kedushin rabbanan before you do the yibum. Again, what does the second one do? Maimer ikani lo, he's not sure if it's kani or not. Ikamakani, if the first one acquires her, has some effect. So Basra, what does the second one do? Because he's already effective. He's already affected the yibum or the partial yibum or the kedushin of the yibum with the maimer. Vikama lo kani. And if the second one doesn't do anything, basra nami lo kani. So Rav Gamliel's reason why he says that ein get acher get ein maimer acher maimer is because either the first one does something, the second one there's nothing left for the second one to do. And if the first one doesn't do anything, so the second one certainly doesn't do anything. Obviously, the first one does something in the sense that the rabbi said if you give the first one a get, you can't marry her relatives. So it does something. It's like you're married to her. But that's basically what we're assuming now is as far as the Gemara is going to slug that up. Eisvei Abaya, wait a minute, listen to this. Umoder Gamliel's moder sheyesh get acher maimer. You gave a mimer to one and get to another. Obviously, if you give mimer, you want to divorce that one. You had two women who fell to you, number one and number two. They're unrelated, Leah and Sarah, whatever. Number one and number two. You gave mimer to one. Okay, you can go ahead and make Yibam now. But let's say you gave a get to the other one. So that ruins everything. Now you got to get rid of them both. Give a chalitza. You got to give get to the one who got, you have to give another get to the one who got the mimer, because mimer's a fish rabbanan, you need a get to rabbanan. So you need a get for her, and then you need chalitza. But he says, there is a get after mimer. Listen, umaymer acha get. If you gave a get to one, a mimer would still have an effect on the other one, on the second one. So you need a get for that mimer too. And listen to this: the get acher bia umaymer, and a get has an effect after bia mimer. Now wait a minute. It doesn't mean you first did bia, because you first did bia. That's it. Ain't acher bia klum. If the first thing you did was before you consummated the marriage to one of the sisters, that's it. You're married to her. You don't need chalitza anymore. The second one goes away, and that's it. He means this: forget acher bia mimer. If you did mimer on number one, and bia on number two, and a get on number three. Let's say there were three wives. Reuben had died with three wives, 1, 2, and 3. What? That's right. The get acher bia. This is going out on public airwaves. You got to be careful what you say. You might get sued, right? Forget acher bia umaymer. So if you did mimer on number one, bia number two, get still has an effect on number three. Now, umaymer acher bia get, and also let's say you started with a get on number one, bia number two, and mimer after them. Wait a minute. If Gamliel's not sure, you're saying now what's Pshat Gamliel? Why does the second mimer acher mimer and the second get after get work? Because you're not sure if the get works or not. Wait a minute. Gamliel said tahavi kabia de lechatchila. The second thing you did in these last two cases, what happened? You said a get after mimer and bia, mimer, bia, and get, or get, bia, and mimer. Okay, and the third thing has an effect. The get in the first case and the mimer in the second case that we just said has an effect on the third co-wife. So the first, then if he's not sure, then it should be like bia lechatchila, and it should be konada kana bila bisman shi betchila ein achrei klum. How do you say over here that if the bia was the middle thing, the third thing still works? I don't get you. If he's not sure, look at it mamonavshach. And Rashi explains in mamonavshach. Take a look at Rashi tahave. Have bia samsos kebia betchila ve'lo tahari ma'aser shlishis. The third thing should not ben get acher bia mimer, ben mimer acher bia get. Mamonavshach. Why? Rashi explains. Get acher bia mimer shouldn't work. And again, if you had mimer, then bia, then get. We're talking about three different co-wives: mimer, bia, and then get. Lo lahani. The third get, the third person, the third co-wife, the get shouldn't help. Why? Because manavshach, if the mimer is kani legam, if it works, sula mahani bia. The get abasrei, the get, the bia, and the get afterwards shouldn't have any effect, right? The e mimer lo kani, and if the mimer is not kona, if it doesn't work at all, so the second thing, the second woman who got the bia should be like bia betchila. We said if you give bia to one, so the first thing you did was bia, that's it. Ein acher bia klum. You've consummated. There's no chalitza. There's no other women. Nothing else counts. So manavshach. If the mimer works, if you say what? That in the first case, what do we say? That mimer acher bia, the get acher bia mimer. You started with mimer on the first wife, number one. Number two got bia, and number three got the get. Well, if the mimer works, so then the bia shouldn't have any effect afterwards. And if the mimer doesn't work, then the second thing, the bia should have a full effect, and the get shouldn't work afterwards. That's what Rashi says, mamonavshach. Get acher bia mimer lo lahani. The get after the bia mimer should help. The e mimer comma kani. If the first mimer, the first thing you did was a mimer on number one, the gamre, that works, and nothing else. You get sulamani bia. We get acher shouldn't help afterwards. B mimer lo kani. And if mimer doesn't work, midi, it doesn't work at all. And then it says bia shalachra, the second woman that you gave the bia to, bia betchilu ksheir v'sulamani get b'shlishis. The get shouldn't help on the third one at all. The tana bia b'zman she b'tchila and klum. V'chein maimer acher bio get. If you started with get on number 1, bia on number 2, and maimer number 3, e get kamadach. If the get first person one salamani bia, if the first get is powerful enough to dismiss her, then the b afterwards shouldn't help on number 2. If you get lo dachi midi, so then the first thing you did was bia. The thing you did on the second co-wife, which was bia, should be like a first thing. So it doesn't make sense to say the Rav is not sure. It either works or it doesn't work. And as we're saying now, what's Rav reason why he says ein maimer get? Because if maimer is good, then that's it. Like you marry a woman once. If I give kedushin to a woman, marry a woman, can somebody else give her kedushin now afterwards? No, she's married to me. A woman can only be married to one person at a time. So if I give kedushin to one, the second one doesn't help. So again, here, if maimer works, nothing should come afterwards. And if maimer doesn't work, then the bia number 2 should be like the first thing. And then either way, the third thing shouldn't help. Elma Rabaya, that's not shot in Rav Meir. The reason Rav Meir says ein maimer get is not because he's not sure if it works. Elam Rabaya, la'olam pshita beget the dachi. Get does have some effect. Umaimer dekani, and maimer also has some effect. Get has some dismissing quality, and maimer has some acquisition quality. Miu, Amar Rabbanan, the Rabbanan said, Hayavama, b'chad sad mahani ba get, b'chad sad mahani ba maimer. It partially, the get helps partially, and the maimer helps partially. So therefore, get lo dachi. Why doesn't get help? Kama. Whatever power the first get had is consumed. You've used that power of the get. A second get doesn't work. A mimer after a get or a get after mimer could work because, as we'll see, those aren't the same powers. In other words, if you have to visualize it, that's not really the philosophical way, but visualize it. A woman has this Yavama, whose husband died with no children, has half of her body ready for a get and half of her body ready for a mimer. It's not really the right way it works. I'm just giving you a visual just to visualize it. So if you gave her a get, okay, that worked on the get part of her body. And a second get is meaningless. It's like giving a get to a woman who's already divorced, right? And the other part of her body is accepting mimer. So if you gave mimer to that part of her body, so there's no room for another mimer to have an effect. So and the same thing with the man. In other words, he only has he can only do so much mimer and he can only do so much get. So if it's one man on 2 women, he can only do so much mimer. Once he's done one mimer, he can't do another mimer, or another brother cannot do a mimer on this same woman if it's 2 brothers and 1 woman. So again, Elam Rabbi Lolam Shita Leilam Miliel beget the Dachi Mimer the Kani. But get has an effect of dismissing, and mimer has an effect of acquisition. Niu Amar Rabbanan Hayavama B'chad Sad Mahani Baget, and one half of her, so to speak, get works. B'chad Sad Mahani Ba Mimer. Get acher get lo Dachi. The second get doesn't work. The Dachalakama, because the first get did all get can do. All the power of get that the rabbis gave to a Yavam and Yavama, the first one accomplished everything. Because whatever power you had with the mimer, whether it's 1 Yavam and 2 Yavamas or 2 Yavams and 1 Yavama, it's already been consumed. Get acher mimer get, that does help. High milsa kadachi, high milsa kakani. And so to speak, that one half of her body that's ready for acquisition of mimer is one part, the other part's ready for get. So if you gave, let's say there were 2 brothers and 1 woman, one guy gave her a mimer and one guy gave her a get, there's room for it to have an effect. The mimer's chal, let's say, on one half of the brain, and the get's chal on the other half of the brain. There's room for that. That's how Rav Meir understands it. So he's not saying that he's not sure whether get and mimer works at all. It certainly works, but it works only partially. But it only works to a certain extent. If you used the get one, you have like one. You have only 1 arrow of get and 1 arrow of mimer. Once that arrow is gone, you don't have any more power in that. So once you did 1 get, the second one doesn't have any effect. Same thing with mimer. Get acher get lo dachi da dachalakama mimer acher mimer lokani da karalakama. Get acher mimer mimer acher get. That does work. High milsa kadachi by milsa. It's 2 different powers. One is the power of dismissal. One is the power of acquisition. And that's how he learned. That's Pshat Rav Meir. What about the rabbis? The rabbis say yesh get acher get yesh mimer acher mimer. But the Rabbanan will learn kol chad b'chad takinu l'Rabbanan get u'maimer b'yavama. Okay, the rabbis will say like this: to every yavam, to every yavama, every yavam to every yavama has a power of both get and mimer. So they'll say like this: okay, let's say Reuben died, left two wives, and number one and number two, and left her brother Shimon. So Shimon could do get on one and get on another one, because the way the rabbi set up the power of the get is that there's a power of the get to give to each one. Or if there was two brothers and one woman, each brother had the power to give a get to each one and mimer to each one. It's a conceptualization of how you understand the rabbi's takana of get and mimer. Now he goes back to Gamliel. The high bia, we're halfway down the page, and also at the first of the wide lines in Rashi, if you got one eye on Rashi. The high bia psula. Now, what does it bia psula? Bia psula means a bia that's not first. It's bia after mimer or after get. Not after mimer, after get. Bia after mimer is the right way to do things, right? The high bia psula adif mimer grima mimer. So Rashi explained this. Why is it get a bia she'achar mimer? If you did a bia on two different women, we mean. In other words, we're talking about bia after mimer or after get, but on two different women, not on the same woman. So yesh get achar bia she'achar mimer v'yesh mimer achar bia v'get. If you did the get first, the bia psula psula. This psula, or this bia psula, which was after a mimer on the other woman or after a get on this woman, right? It's a psula. He explains that by the Gemara, by psula adif mimer green mimer. It's stronger than mimer on the one hand, and it's less strong, and it's weaker than mimer on the other hand. Adif mimer is ben mimer the mimer achamimer lokani. According to Gamliel, we're explaining now. We're back on Gamliel. Mimer achamimer, Gamliel says whatever his reasoning is doesn't work. The second mimer doesn't work. If you did mimer on one and bia on the other one, we just said Gamliel's motive that it works. Even the third one could work. So bia achar mimer works. In other words, if you did mimer on number one and mimer number two, the second one is meaningless. But if you did mimer on number one and bia on number two, it has an effect. It has an effect. You need a get, etc. Right? So the ilu bia achar mimer mahani ugriya mimer, and this bia psula, bia done after a get or after mimer, is weaker, let's say, than mimer. The mimer achar a get kani lekule shiur. If you gave a get to one and a mimer to the other, right? It gave get to one and mimer to the other. It acquires everything, meaning there's nothing that comes after that. The mimer achar a get lekule shiur the get. It kani lekule shiur. It acquired whatever was left over. There's no third way to go. Rashi says, if you gave first a get, if you gave a get and then you gave mimer, a third mimer doesn't help. A third mimer doesn't help. The get. But if you gave a get to one and then bia for another one, you could still give mimer on the third one. So therefore, it's the mimer is this bia psula is weaker. Why? Because if you gave a get to one and then mimer to another one, that's it. Nothing else helps. So the mimer acquired every part of the zika that was left there. You say if you gave a get to one, mimer on. But if you gave a get to one and bia to number two, you could still do mimer on number three, showing you that bia does not acquire as much as if number two got bia, does not acquire as much as does not acquire as much of the zika as mimer of number two, because if you gave a get to number one and a mimer to number two, you can't do mimer on number three. Why? Because the mimer has acquired everything. But if you even get to number one and bia to number two, you can still do mimer on number three. So bia does not acquire as much of the zika. It doesn't consume as much. So in that sense, the bia psula is weaker than, again, by bia psula in the Gemara, adif mimer, it's stronger than mimer v'gri mimer. Adif mimer, it's stronger than mimer. Dila mimer achar mimer local mani. Second mimer doesn't help. Dila bia achar mimer does help. So bia seems to be stronger. Bia psula does seems to be stronger than mimer. On the other hand, it's weaker because if you had a get and a mimer, get on number one, mimer on number two, right? If you did get on number one and bia on number two, you could still do something on number three. Whereas if you did a get on number one and mimer on number two, you can't do anything afterwards. Agree with me, mimer, the ila mimer achar a get, kani lekuli shiur to get. If you gave a mimer, if you gave a get number one and mimer number two, you can't do a mimer number three because mimer achar mimer doesn't work. Vilu bia achar get, and if you didn't get a number one and bia number two, you could still do a mimer on number three, would have an effect. So it's a strange thing. He's saying that the bia psula is on the one hand it's stronger than mimer, and then it's weaker than mimer. Tana Rabbanan. Now this Gemara really should have been at the beginning of the Gemara and Mishnah, but explains now what does Ramulio mean. Case of Ramulio, what is the example? We are explaining the logic, the theory behind Gerach or Get, why that doesn't work on Ramulio, and it's a difficult concept. The Rabbanan, it's a question how you visualize the women and the men between Rabbanan and Rabbi Gamliel, and Rabbi Gamliel's idea that that Bia Psula is stronger than Maimer on the one hand, weaker than Maimer on the other hand. But what is the case itself? So here the Gemara explains. Case of Gamliel, Engach Get Shteivam. So this is really what we explained in the Mishnah, but we need it. With the Gemara, this would have been helpful in the Mishnah. Case of Gamliel, Engach Get. What's the example? Shteivam Shafli Veivam Echad. Number one and number two co-wives of Reuben. Reuben died with no children. Left the two wives, number one and number two, to Shimon. V'nasan get Lazuba Gizot. He gave a get to each one. From Gamliel over Cholitz, what do you do now? You gave a get to each one. As soon as you give a get to one, you can't perform Yibam. You're not supposed to perform Yibam. You're not supposed to, but if you did, we'll see. But he gave a get to each one, so you need chalitza. You still need chalitza. Gamliel over Cholitz Rishona, Vasav Krovasel. Give chalitza to the first one, and you can't marry her relatives. In other words, the second one has no effect at all. Technically, you can give chalitza to the second one too, right? They're both co-wives, but what's the rule? Don't ruin something that somebody else can use. You gave a get to the first one, so now she's also to a Kohen, right? You gave a get to the Kohen. Miraban, she's also to a Kohen, like a chalutza is Miraban also to a Kohen. So if you gave a get to the first one, Gamliel said, and then you gave a get to number two, the second one's meaningless. Okay, what do you have to do now? You still need chalitza. You can give chalitza. So give chalitza to the first one. You can give chalitza to the second one too. Either one, but why ruin her to a Kohen? First one's already ruined. That's what he means. The Chum doesn't get Luzub. Chum disagrees with Gamliel. They say if he gave a get to number one, a get to number two, also you're also to both of them. Why? Because they both have an effect. As Gamliel said, and the Rabbanan said that the power that the rabbis gave, that the get works on a Yavama, each brother has a shtickle power. And each, if there's only one brother, he has power for both wives to give them both a get, and it has an effect. So nothing get you can't marry either one of them. But chalitz lachsman, give chalitz to either one. Doesn't make any difference now. They're both ruined already to a coin. The same way. That's by one yavam and two yavamas. The same thing if there were two brothers and only one woman. There was only number one. Kate said, that's the same thing. Either way, that's how it works, right? You get through the same thing applies to yavams and one yavama. If each of them gave him a get, each one is puzzled to marry her relatives. Obviously, if it's only one woman and she got a get, she's the one you give chalitza to. There's nobody else. Case what's the second case? The Mishnah said, number one and number two fell to Shimon. V'asa maimer v'zu maimer zu. He gave maimer to each one. Again, Gamliel says that the second maimer is meaningless. No saying get l'rishoni. You give a get to the first one. V'cholitzla. Right? That's what you should do. You gave a maimer away, so you give a get. Why can't you can't marry the second one because a maimer the second one the maimer doesn't work. So Gamliel says no saying get. We should give a get to the first one. V'cholitzla and give her chalitza because you still need chalitza to get rid of the zika. You never consummated the marriage. Also, Rav said you can't marry her relatives, right? And you can marry the relatives second because the second one is meaningless. What's the question you should ask over here? If you gave Maimer to one and then Maimer to number two, what does Gamliel say? The second one's meaningless, right? Second one's meaningless. Okay, so what do you do? He says, give a get to the first one and give her chalitza too. Why can't you marry the second one? Why can't you marry the first one? Why can't you marry the first one? You say the second Maimer is meaningless. All you have left is the first Maimer. So what do? You give a get and chalitza. So the Gemara is going to ask it on the base. Why can't you just consummate the marriage to the first one? You gave her Maimer. The second Maimer is meaningless. So just marry the first one, and that's it. You can marry her. Technically, you could, but the rabbi said don't because you might marry the second one by mistake. And once you gave Maimer to the first one, you can't marry the second one because you can't build two houses. So that's okay. The Chacham say no, and get l'shteim. You give a get to both of them. Why? Because the Maimer, both Maimers work. So you can't marry either one of them now. Give a get to both of them. But also you can't marry the relatives of both of them. But chalitza lachim, give chalitza to either one because they both that once you give a get to both, doesn't make any difference which you give chalitza to. The same thing would apply if there were two yavams, two brothers, and one yavama, and they both gave her Maimer. They both have to give her again. They're both also on her family. Amar Mar. Let's go back to the first case here that you described. According to Malil, if you gave a get to both of them, both women, Malil says you give a chalitza to the first one, but also because the second get has no meaning. So you just give a get and chalitza. You already gave each one a get. The second get is meaningless. Give chalitza to the first one, and you can marry her. What happened over here? You gave a get to both. Okay, the second one doesn't mean anything, so you give chalitza to her. But now you're giving chalitza to a woman who already got a get. And Rav Shmuel holds that if you give chalitza to somebody who already got a get, their zika is already weakened. The bond is weakened because of the get, and that chalitza therefore is a weak chalitza, and therefore you still have to give chalitza to all the other. So the other brothers also have to give a chalitza. Chalitza the boss to get lo nifter tzara. Her tzara is not part. Not only we'll see now the brothers, but lo nifter tzara, meaning the tzara over here, number two. What did number two get now? Nothing, right? Ain't got a get. The second get's meaningless. Well, she has a stronger zika because she didn't get a get. Her get was meaningless. She didn't receive a get. So Shmuel says if you gave chalitza to the one who you gave a get to, that's a weak chalitza because it's a weakened zika. And you still need a strong chalitza on the other tzara. So the Charsakash and Shmuel, no. I say that according to one who holds that there is a strong zika, that it's almost like you're married. And therefore, if you gave a weak chalitza, doesn't work on a strong zika. And the second wife, the tzara, has a strong zika. From Galil Savar Ein Zika, Galil is Ein Zika. Zika is not that strong anyway. And therefore, if you gave, they're both weak, so to speak. So if you gave chalitza to the one who got a get already, it doesn't make any difference. Rashi says, last line on the page, since it doesn't have a strong zika anyway, it doesn't hold that zika strong, even if any chalitza works. So therefore, Shmuel say, I was talking about the one who holds yesh zika, and Gamliel holds ein zika. So the Gemara says, well, possibly, if Gamliel holds ein zika, would you say the Rabbanan suffer yesh zika? Now, there's no svara for that. It's just saying that since Gamliel and Rabbanan are arguing over here, since Gamliel says ein zika, would the Rabbanan say yesh zika? Not that there's a svara for it. There's no reason to believe that. But the Gemara says, maybe the Rabbanan would say yesh zika. But Tani Seif, and it says, there were two brothers and one wife. The Rabbanan say yesh zika. So what does he say? Chalitza psula. A chalitza psula, meaning a chalitza that came after a get where it's weakened. All the brothers have to give a chalitza. And over here, if the Rabbanan say yesh zika, right? Because the Rabbanan say yesh get acher get. So over here, when he gave a get to the first one, we're saying over here that he gave a get to both of them. And according to Rabbanan, both of them, it has an effect. The second one also, the second get also has an effect, has some power. He gives chalitza to one. Why give chalitza to one? Chalitza to both. If Rabbi Arpuna says that chalitza psula tzricha lachzor kol ha'achim. This is the difficulty in understanding this parak and later parakim also that we didn't have in the first three parakim. We're just trying to get the women and the men in order, right? Here we're trying to understand the concept of a weaker, a mimer and a get rabbanan. What is the power? So over here we see Rabbi says if you have a weak chalitza, all the brothers have to do it. It's not enough for one brother to do it. So over here, if there were two brothers, we said the same thing happens by two brothers and one woman. So over here, why is it enough for one brother to give chalitza after they each gave a get to the one woman? Each brother should have to give a chalitza. No, Bein Rav Nachman and Bein Rabban and Savi Ein Zika. No, they both hold Ein Zika. So if you hold Ein Zika, it's not a weak chalitza works because there's a weak Zika to begin with. And I'm going like the man who holds Yesh Zika. Rashi explains. I'm talking about the one who holds Yesh Zika. So if there's Yesh Zika and there's a strong Zika and you give a weak chalitza is not going to help on a strong zika, so you have to give chalitza. All the brothers have to give chalitza. Rav Meir and Rabbanan, they both hold up ein zika. They're arguing simply by gerach get or ma'amar chamaimar. Does the second get and the second ma'amar respectively work based on the svars we explained in Amar Aleph? That how does Meir describe it? He says, get works on partial of the body and ma'amar works on partial of the body. That's not really what it means. We're just trying to visualize it. So once you gave mimer on this part of the body, you can't give another mimer there, but a get still works. If you give mimer on one part of the body, you can still get on the other part of the body. And according to Rabbanan, no, each of the Yavama, each brother has power on each of the women for get and mine. That's how they understand it conceptually. Amar Mar. Let's go back. This is the question I mentioned on Amar. Amar Mar. Also, Maimer Bazu. Maimer Bazu. If you gave Maimer to each of the two women, there was number one and number two fell Yibam, right? Two co-wives fell from Reuben, who died with no children, to Shimon. And he gave Maimer on both. So according to Mulil, no say get Rishon of Cholis love also becomes Sarah. Mulil says the second Maimer doesn't work, and therefore he says you give a get to the first one. You gave Maimer, you need a get for the Maimer, and you give her Chalitza. Also, we saying he can't marry relatives, and he can marry this relative of the second one because the second one he didn't do anything to. She's not the Chalutza. She didn't get a get from him. It's meaningless. If he holds ein Maimer, so Rishon Nami Tisyabam. Why can't the first one have heat? And that's what I said. Remember, according to Mulil, ein Maimer. And Shimon, what did Shimon do? He gave Maimer to number one and number two. The second one's meaningless, right? So he says, what do you do after that? Give a get to number one. Number two, you don't need a get to. It doesn't mean anything. You didn't do anything with her. Give a get to her and give her chalitza. Why can't you just do yibam? If the second mimer doesn't work, so do yibam on the first one. You did mimer. The right way to do things is mimer and then yibam. Again, like I mentioned, that you shouldn't do yibam on the first one, even though you could. It's even though but we said, you know what? And by the way, if there would only be one wife and one yavam, certainly that would be the right thing to do. You gave her mimer, now give her a yibam, right? We talked about if you give mimer and then you gave a get, you still need chalitz and all that. But the right thing to do is give her mimer and then give her yibam. That's the proper way to do things. That's the mitzvah. But we're afraid maybe you'll give yibam to the second one. You did mimer on the first one, you change your mind and you give yibam on the second one. That you can't do anymore. Why? Because bias echad ubanav lo bana shnei batim. You can only build one house, not two. So once you give mimer the first one, you can't marry the second one. And that's the reason why you better just give her get the chalitz. Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says an interesting thing now. Rabbi Gamliel, the author of our Mishnah, Ube Shammai, Rab Shimon and Rab Shimon, number 3, Uben Azai, number 4, Rab Nechemia, number 5, we mentioned Nechemia before, Kulu Sfiralahu, they all hold Maimer Kona Kinyan Gomer, that Maimer is a strong Kinyan. Rashi says right away, Lo Gomor Mamish, it doesn't mean 100% acquisition. The only way to do a 100% acquisition is by consummating the marriage of Bia. Elakinyan Chashiv. They all say that Maimer is strong. It's not a weak. It's a question of how much power they have. They all say it's strong. What we just said, why? Because we said if you give Maimer number 1, Maimer number 2 doesn't have any effect. Or if there were 2 brothers and 1 wife and 1 woman, if one gave Maimer, the second one gave Maimer, doesn't have any effect. So the first one's strong. That's when we had this Mishnah before. Shlosha Achim, 3 brothers, right? 3 brothers. We mentioned before. The Mishnah is actually later, but we had this before. The Tanan. What's the Tanan? We had it before in Chavtes. The Tanan. Shlosha Achim, 3 brothers. Reuben, Shimon, Levi. Reuben and Shimon are married to Leah and Rachel, 2 sisters. Levi is single. Leah is single. Levi is single. Now, let's say Reuben died, right? Now, what do we have? We have Leah, who's available. She can't marry Shimon. Why? Because Shimon's married to her sister, married to Rachel. And we have Levi. Okay. Very good. Levi did Maimer, did the right thing. He was the only brother available to perform Yibam, so he did Maimer on her. Then Shimon died. Now he has Maimer on Leah, and he's got the Zika Doraisa on her sister Rachel. What do? The rabbis say over there, you give the Maimer, give get to her and give her chalitza. Nothing you can do here. You can't marry either one because each one is a chotz kukaso. Rab Shimon said, it's Beishamai. Beishamai says, no. Beishamai ishto imo. You stay with your wife. You did Maimer to her. It's like you're married to her. And Shimon's wife was a Zika Doraisa. No, she's excluded now because she's the wife of she's the sister of your wife. And the Maimer that you did on Leah is strong. It's like she's your wife. So you see, Beis Shammai also is like this, that Maimer is strong. Maimer is strong. In that case, Rachel was free to marry. She's a chotzkos. She's free to marry. She's free to marry anybody else. The Maimer that Levi did on Leah is strong, and that excludes Rachel from marrying. It's a chotz kukaso. It's just like if Reuben and Shimon married to two sisters, Leah and Rachel, and Reuben dies. What's the rule? Leah goes out free because she can't marry Shimon because Shimon's married to her sister. So same thing over here. So you see, Beis Shammai holds, that's not what we hold. The Beis Hillel says, no, you got to give chalitza to both, and that's it. Nothing you can do. But Beis Shammai holds, no. The mimer that Levi did on Leah before Shimon died is strong, and therefore it excludes Rachel from marrying her, and she can marry the Shut. The third rabbi, Rav Shimon, we see that B is strong, or that the mimer is strong. Rav Shimon the Tanya, Amar Rav Shimon Chachamim, in B is Rishona Bia, Bia Sheni Ena Bia, in B is Rishona Ena Bia, Bia Sheni Bia. More later, I was going to talk about this. A boy who's 9 years old is capable of having Bia, right? Let's assume a boy who's 9 years old is generally considered of having Bia. Let's say a woman fell Yibam, Reuben died with no children, and he left two brothers, Shimon and Levi. They were both 9 years old. One was 9, one was 10, whatever. They were 9 years old. They were Ktanim, and they performed Bia. Each of them did it on her. Each of them. So the Gemara over there says like this. Rashi brings down the case. Also on her. Sula Yado. Each one, the second one who did Bia ruins the first one's Bia. In other words, the first one had Bia on her. True, he's not Makayim the mitzvah till he's bar mitzvah, whatever, but he performed Yibam. It's like Mimer. The rabbi said that the 9-year-old's Bia is like Mimer. And the second one who did it on who else, they both performed. Now, how did that work? They didn't do it properly, but let's say they both did it that way. They both thought they were doing a mitzvah, so they did it. The first one had performed Bia with him, the second one performed Bia with her. Okay, so the Gemara says, Psula, the second one, ruim Psula al Yado, the Bias Plantation Shanim Kamaimer Shavir Rabbanan, Ravle Maimer Achamaimer, Mukadesh is according to Rabbanan, Af L'Sheni, right? Upasla al Rishon, for the first one, Rabbanan, Dam Yesh Maimer Achamaimer. In a regular case of fiducian, we're not talking about Yibum. If somebody marries, well, he's not capable of fiducian anyway, he's not bar mitzvah. So it was just sex, you know. Now, a 9-year-old had Bia was somebody with a woman, so it's sex. It's not fiducian. Over here, it has an effect because when the woman dies, she's bonded to these two 9-year-old brothers, right? She's bonded to them. So the rabbi said, if the 9-year-old who's capable of Bia, if a 5-year-old kid did it, it's not considered a Bia, whatever. It's not considered, technically, it's not a Bia. But if a 9-year-old did it, it's considered a Bia. Okay, and let's say they both did it, one after another. So the Rabbanan say, yeah, 9-year-old's Bia is like Mimer, and Mimer Achamimer works. So the second one basically ruined the first one's Kedushin, right? Because there's two guys over here. That's what the Rabbanan said. Comes along Rav Shimon, let's go back in Gemara. Shimon says, no, I understand. If the first kid's Bia is a Bia, so the second one is not a Bia. It's nus. It's adultery, so to speak, right? We'll talk about adultery in a minute. But if the first one's works, the second one's not. The Bias Rishona Ain't. If the first one's second, the second one's also not Bia. But Bias Bentasha, the Kamaimer Shavir Rabbanan, it's like Mimer. Become Rav Shimon, ain't Bia. Second one, he says that the Bia of a 9-year-old is like Mimer. And he says if the first one works, then the second one is meaningless. The first one works. So you see over here that he holds that the Bia of a 9-year-old, which is like Mimer, if it's strong, then the second one has no effect. That's what Rashi explains. Bia Shnia ain't a Bia. The Bia Bismanshi Betchila ain't Achral Kum. If the first one is strong, right? The Bia, you see over here Rav Shimon, in Bia Rishona Bia K'nei Lagamre, the second one doesn't do anything because when Bia, if the first thing he did was Bia, nothing else works afterwards. She's not married to the second one of Lo Pasla Rishon. She doesn't move the second one. So you see over here that what? That also be as much become Rav Shimon, Bia Sheni ain't a Bia. The Mimer Rishon Choshev Liknos Kol Koch Mimer. He says over here that you see that according to that if the Bia of a 9-year-old is like Mimer, and Shimon says if the first Bia is a Bia and it is a Bia, the second one is nothing. So you see that he holds that the Bia of a 9-year-old, which is like Mimer, that's choshev to require the whole thing, and the second one's is only znus. So you might say, wait a minute, the second one's znus. It's like adultery, so she can't stay married to the first one. The Rabbanan say each one's ruined the other one effectively, right? Shimon says no. The first one acquires her, and the second one is meaningless because it doesn't help to have to be what it's znus. So Rashi says, what about znus? Znus, like to ruin her, is only when it was done in an adulterous manner, where there's al iske kini v'stir says, he suspected her and all that. Now, he doesn't mean to say if it's a real adultery and they did it on purpose, if there were Adam who saw an adultery, a real adultery somewhere, a woman was married and she had be with somebody else and they ate him to it, or they both admit to it. Obviously, she's forbidden her husband anyway, but she's not really she's not socha, she's a sota vadai, and that's it. And she has to leave her husband and leave the adulterer also. She can't marry either one. But over here, it was, so to speak, it was done by children thinking that they're performing a mitzvah. So in this case, it wouldn't, according to Reb Shimon, the second one is nus. Okay, it's a psul. The truth is that if a woman is married and she commits adultery with a 10-year-old, even though 10-year-old is not punished because he's not bar mitzvah, the woman is punished because she committed adultery, because a bia is a bia, right? But over here, they were, so to speak, both done innocently. They both thought they were doing a mitzvah. In any case, we see over here that Reb Shimon holds that mimer is strong, because the bia of a 9-year-old is like mimer. And he says if the first bia is a bia, if that means if the first bia, which is like mimer, is strong, the second one is meaningless. So he holds that mimer is very strong. Just like when Gamliel says ein mimer acher mimer, and just like we said, Beis Shammai says that the mimer that Levi did on Leah in the second case is so strong that it excludes the Zika D'Oraisa of Shimon's wife when Shimon dies. Ben Azai, that this is the fourth one. Ben Azai, the Tanya Ben Azai, Omer Yesh Mimer Chamimer B'Shnei Yavam V'Yama Achas. If there were two brothers and one Yavama, there is Mimer. Be'ein Mimer Chamimer B'Shnei Yavamas V'Yavam Echad. When there's one Yavam and two Yavamas, ein Mimer Chamimer, because the first one's very strong. Rashi brings down another girsa that changes it around. That he says there's a svara to say that there's Yesh Mimer Chamimer, where two women and one Yavam. But he prefers this gears that we have in the Gemara. Yesh Mamar Chamar B'Shnei Yavam. There's two brothers and one Yavama. There is Mimer. One Yavam. If he does Mimer on one, the second one does no. That's like Rav Gamliel, that the first Mimer is strong. The fifth one was that Mimer is strong. Rav Nechemia, the Tanya Rav Nechemia Omer. We had this the other day, just yesterday. Rav Nechemia Omer. Achas bila b'achas chalitza bein betchila bein b'emtza b'sof. If you have a bia, whether it's anywhere in the beginning, the first one, the second one, the third one, or chalitza, first one, second, third one, ein acharei klum. Nothing else helps afterwards. Bia psula to kamayim shavar banan. If bia is the second one or the third one, right? Bia psula. Let's say bia is the second. You did a bia after it. After you did a get on number one, you did a bia on number two. A bia psula is like mimer. Viktani ein acharei klum, and still it's strong that nothing else afterwards. So you see that. When you see that mimer is strong and nothing else can come afterwards, ein mimer chamimer, like Rav Gamliel said, like Ben Azai said, that ein mimer chamimer by one yavam and two yavamas, ein mimer chamimer. Why? Because the first one's very strong. And we had Reb Shimon saying in the case of a 9-year-old's bia, which is like a mimer, also nothing comes afterwards. And the same thing with Reb Beis Shammai in the case of Levi and Leah, the mimer is very strong. Here also. Same, but the mimer, the bia psula, a bia which is number two, which came in the middle, meaning you gave get or mimer to number one, and to number two you gave bia, right? As a bia psula. The mimer, it's like mimer. The tani enachrelakum, and still nothing comes afterwards. So you see, Rav Nechemia says. Rav Nechemia also is like him. We had Rav Nechemia in the Gemara. We had that in the Gemara, and it's actually in the Mishnah, right? In the Mishnah that. The Tanakama said that the Tanakama in explaining the Mishnah, we said when it comes to bia, if bia is first, then achar klum, right? Then we said that bila b'zman shebetchila achar klum, be'emtza b'sof yesh achar klum. Chalitza, whenever it happens, that ends off the whole zika. Bia only helps at the beginning, not at the end. Rav Nechemia said bia or chalitza, if it was the first or the second or the third, be'emtza b'sof, has an effect. So if it's number two, if bia was the second thing done, it's a bia psula, and a bia psula is like mimer, and still it's strong because it's ein acharei klum. And like the last Rashi on the page says, bia psula k'mayim shavar rabbanan, the lanaf k'mei beget. In other words, if you had a bia psula, let's say the first one you gave mimer to, the second one you gave bia to, it's not enough just to give a get now to this one that you gave him. If you for the first thing you did when Yibam fell, you did bia. What happens then? Fully married, all you need is a get. No chalitza. If you want to get rid of, stay married. Stay married to her forever. But if you decide to get rid of her, all you need is a get. But if it was a bia psula, for example, you gave a get to number one, or you gave mimer to number one, and then you did bia to number two, it's not enough just to give a get to number two. because you're not really fully married. You haven't used up the entire zika, and you still need chalitza. So you see over here that a bia psula is like mimer. It's not strong enough, and you still need chalitza afterwards. It's not enough just to give a get. You still need chalitza, and still you say einach rulei klum. No, that's it. After that, according to Rav Nechemia, if you give even a bia psula, nothing else happens afterwards. So all these 5 rabbis, all these 5 shittas hold that mimer is very strong. Okay, tomorrow's Gemara will deal with the Mishnah itself. The Mishnah says Keitzad Asa B'Maimer. We'll go into the details of the Mishnah. Today we're doing with more conceptualization of what mimer and get accomplish. No, then it'd be you can't be a psula after be a psula, right? On the second one, on the third one, yeah, be a probably would have no effect at all. Be a psula, right? Because he said that's what Nechemia says. Ein acharei klum. Be a psula, ein acharei klum. According to the Tanakama, maybe be a psula, maybe it would have an effect. In other words, if you gave bia to the third one, so possibly you not only would have to give her a get, but it would be forbidden to her relatives, etc., because it has some effect. According to Nechemia, it has no effect.
Got that?